Nice. So welcome to well, first of all, welcome to Crash Course 2020. We're so happy you're here. We have a great set of talks lined up, so we hope you'll stick around for the next couple days. So yeah, welcome to the iOS app development talk. My name is Olivia Carodi. I'm a sophomore at Carnegie Mellon, majoring in computer science. Yeah, so I guess we can go ahead and get started then. So first of all, we're just going to start with some quick trivia. You can just vote in the Zoom participants window. So the first question is, when was the first iPhone released? Yes for 2005, no for 2006, go slower for 2007, or go faster for 2008. Okay, it looks like most people are saying go slower, so 2007. And that is correct. Nice job, guys. Yeah, so moving on, next question. How many apps are currently on the App Store? 1.7 million, 2.2 million, 2.9 million, or 3.1 million? Yes, this one is a bit more split. Quite a few go faster. It's actually 2.2 million. So yeah, that's a very large number. There are a lot of apps on the App Store right now, and a lot of people kind of have iPhones. So there's definitely a really wide audience that you can reach by iOS app development. So that's what we are here to teach you guys today. So first of all, just kind of starting off with the tools. Today we're going to be working with Swift and Xcode. So Swift is the language that we will be developing in, and then Xcode is the IDE. So that's kind of the development environment that we will be using for the purposes of creating apps. And here you can just see some popular frameworks that Apple has. So some of them you might be familiar with, like Photos, Touch ID. I'm sure many of you probably use those on a daily basis. Some of the other ones, like SpriteKit, are used to create games. So when you start developing iOS apps, there's a lot of things you can do. You can have access to all of these frameworks and use the health kit or develop apps for an Apple Watch. There's so much you can do just when you start digging, and all of Apple's documentation is online. So a lot of times you can just kind of Google, look at some of their developers conference slides, and they show you how to use all of these. So it's pretty incredible how much you can access, as an iOS developer. So this is the main kind of paradigm and architecture of an iOS app. So it's called the Model View Controller. We're going to talk about each of these parts in a bit more depth. So starting with the model, this is where you keep a lot of your data. You're going to do the parsing of the data, make network requests, and also persisting data if you're using core data or something else to store it so it is saved between login sessions on a phone. So to the right here is an example of a model. We have a dining location struct, and then we are doing some JSON parsing from an API request. So we will actually get more to this later, and we will be using this in a demo. But yeah, this is kind of taken directly from an app that uses ScottyLabs' own dining API. Moving on, we have the view. So on the other side, the model is all of the data. The view has all of the UI components. So Apple has recently announced Swift UI, which is kind of a new UI that is definitely gaining popularity. For this talk, we're going to be focusing on UIKit, but just know that Swift UI is another option, just slightly newer, so not many people with as much experience. And then you also have the storyboard, which is where a lot of your UI is going to be. It's a very kind of graphical interface, so you can drag and drop components and do a lot without even having to touch a line of code, which is kind of cool. And then you also have graphics and animation, which are more things you can do on the view side, kind of the opposite of the data. And then the last part is the controller. So the controller is how we kind of connect these together, because as you might have seen on the first slide, the model and the data, or sorry, the model and the view, they weren't communicating directly with each other. They were all both communicating with a controller, which kind of acts as the intermediary between the two. So this is where most of your code and logic from the app is going to be. It connects the model with the view, and also acts as a delegate for the view, which means you have to conform to certain protocols. We're not really going to go into too much depth about that because it can get somewhat confusing, but just a good thing to know. And here's where you have these things called UI view controllers. So you'll be doing a lot of coding the view controllers. It's what connects the drag and drop elements that you added in your storyboard to the actual code and makes them interact with each other. And then on the right is the view controller lifecycle. You start off with view did load, view will appear, view did appear, view will disappear, and then view did disappear. For the most part, you kind of use view did load, view will appear, and view will disappear. Those are kind of the main ones, but know that all of these functions are ones you can override in a view controller class. So now we're going to move on to the demo, because a demo is probably the best way to get practice and kind of go through a real app. So we are going to be using the ScottyLabs Dining API. Yep, shout out to that. And we are going to be making an app that uses all of the dining locations on campus, so you can view all of them with their descriptions. I'm going to link some starter code in the chat. Feel free to download it and follow along, or this will also be posted on our website so you can follow along later if you're interested. Okay, there is the starter code. Yeah, so I'm going to share the pre-downloaded starter code. Can everyone see this? Yep. Well, I guess first of all, before I kind of get to the demo, are there any questions about anything I went over? I know I kind of went through some of it fast, but a demo is probably the best way to kind of see it in action and how you would go through the process of creating an app. But if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will try and monitor that as well. No questions? Sweet, okay. We are going to move on to the demo then. So if everyone can see this. So this is the starter code, which you can download from the GitHub link. We don't really have much. It's just from the storyboard point of view, it's all blank. We do have these two files, the dininglocation.swift and the diningapi.swift. So these are two model files. A lot of the data stuff is easier just to include in starter code, because especially when you're making API requests, it can get a bit difficult to go over in kind of a live demo. But I guess we can just kind of quickly walk through what's already in here. So you saw this on the slides actually. We have our dining location struct, which has a name field, which is a string, a description, and a location. They're all strings. The different fields for our individual dining locations. And then here we have our function just parses the results from the JSON and puts them into the corresponding struct fields. So we can call this kind of initializer later on. I don't have dining location and dining API. Did I download the wrong thing? Maybe there could also, yeah, I'm not sure. I will take a look at that later and try and update it if I accidentally uploaded the wrong thing or didn't add those to the starter code. So I will take a look at that later. The tutorial will also be posted, so you can walk through it at your own time with some details. Yeah, so we can move on to the dining API.swift. So this is where a lot of the actual API request is made. So we have our dining API URL, and we just kind of make a request and parse the data. Not going to go into too much information about that. One thing to note is we do fetch it asynchronously using this dispatch queue because we don't want to occupy the main thread when making API calls. Are there any questions on that? Or how long does it take to set up a bare bones starter code like this? Yeah, it doesn't take all that long. In the tutorial, we also give you the files or what should be in the files. So you will need to like create an Xcode project, install a couple of dependencies, but we also walk through that entire process because you will need these pods, the Alamo Fire and Swifty JSON pods. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. A lot of the actual app logic we are going to walk through now. So we can go ahead and open up our main storyboard file. Yeah, sometimes Xcode can get a bit slow, especially when running Zoom at the same time. So apologies if it takes a while. Okay, sweet. Looks like it's up. So here we have an initial view controller with this view controller file. A lot of these files are automatically generated for us, but we are actually going to want to store all of the dining location data in a table view. So we are going to go ahead and create a new view controller. You can hit that plus at the top right, and we want to drag out a table view controller. You can drag and drop, and this gives us the template that we want for our table view controller with a couple of prototype cells. A lot of it's actually already done for us, so we're going to go ahead and create a corresponding file for that where we can put our logic. So this is going to be a table view controller file. When you create a new file, you are going to want to create a Cocoa Touch class. Just makes things easier for you and adds in a lot of the code for starting with. So we are going to subclass this of UI table view controller and called it our dining locations table view controller. Next, and create. So here we have our table view controller. As you can see, a lot of this code is already filled in for us because there are some important functions that we need to override. particularly the number of sections and number of rows in sections. So this kind of tells Xcode exactly how many rows we want to have in our table view. So the first thing we're going to do actually is connect our view controller to the actual controller in our storyboard. So if we click on that, and then in the right tab over here, we are going to subclass it of, set the class to be the dining locations table view. Are there any questions on how we kind of got the table view up? Anything like that? Any raised hands? No. Sweet. So I guess we're good to continue. So in our table view controller, we can hard code these values. For number of sections, it's usually just one. I'm sure you've probably seen some apps that have multiple sections and then multiple cells in the different sections. But this we can also hard code. We can hard code it to be 5 for now. But we're going to want to make it slightly more advanced later. So here is another important function that we can uncomment out. So this is where we are actually going to get the cells and insert them into the table view. So this kind of has a default value of some reuse identifier. We need to set a reuse identifier for our cells. So if we go into this cell, we need to set our reuse identifier. So we're going to do dining location cell. And then we're going to copy that and paste that right in here. So now this connects the cells, the individual cells that we will be adding the data to what we had in our storyboard. So one function we are going to want to create at first is going to be to receive the data from the API. So in our API, we have this function fetch locations. So we are going to want to call that function. So we are just going to do, we're just going to want to create a new function. We're going to call it refresh locations. We can create it private, refresh. And this is where we're going to be receiving the data from our API. So we can call the dining API function. Dining API does not want to autocomplete. Dining API dot fetch locations. There we go. And then this is what is called a completion handler. Can sometimes get a bit tricky, but we are going to call the new locations that we get new locations. And then we need an in, which basically tells us once we finish fetching these locations, what do we want to do? So the first thing we want to do is store them in a variable. So we are going to have a var dining locations. And that is going to be of type, is going to be a dining locations array. So we can access the dining location type that we defined earlier. And then we had the brackets for the array, and then parentheses is how we declare that. The syntax might be similar to some other languages you've seen before, just slightly different. You don't need the semicolons like you do in Java, which is kind of nice. And we also use var versus let. Var just makes it mutable. If you use let, we would not be able to change it. So we're going to keep that a var. And then we are going to do self So that self allows us to access dining locations. Self.dining locations equals new locations. So this is what we got from our dining API, and we want to set that equal to the locations that we have up here. Are there any questions so far? No? Okay. And then the last thing we want to do is there's this automatic function that we can call. Sorry. So we're going to access our table view because we subclassed it of a UI table view controller. And then we want to call reload data so that every time we refresh our locations, we actually update the table view UI. So now that we have that, we are able to set up a lot of our actual table view data. So in our table view, the number of rows we want is the length of our dining locations. So we're going to return dining locations dot count, and that's the length. Another way of accessing the length. And then we can also change this function where we want to actually add a title to our cell. So we get this convenient variable called index path, which tells us which row we are accessing in the table view. So we want our new dining location. So var location of type dining location is going to be our dining locations array. And the index we want to access is this index path. And then we want to do dot row, which is going to get us which row in the table view we are accessing. And then we can do cell. We want to change the title of the cell so it matches the title of the dining location. Feels jumping straight into code, and I don't have much experience with it. I was hoping for a more high-level introduction to iOS development. Yeah, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to cover a lot of iOS development in just 45 minutes, but hopefully this kind of gives an introduction of how you would go about trying to create an app. And we also have the tutorial, and the slides will be posted, so you can look back at that and try and walk through it on your own. Okay, so we are going to continue. So we want to set our title of the cell, cell.text label. So this is kind of automatically added to a cell. And then .text. And we can set that equal to the title of our location. .name. And then we just return our cell. Yeah, we can also make this a let since we never changed the value of it. Are there any questions on this? Any parts people having issues with? No? Okay, so we can go ahead and run this then. Can you guys see the simulator or no?
We cannot see it.
No? Okay, I will have to change the screen share then. Although one important thing to note is we're not actually going to see anything because we didn't do anything when we set up the view. So after setting up the view, we have to call our refresh location functions, and that is actually going to update the table view for us with the corresponding data. Okay, let me go ahead and stop that. Sorry about this, Xcode's taking a while. Okay, and then we currently have this as our initial view controller. So we actually want to make this our initial view controller. So it's the first one we see whenever we bring up the app. And that should be good. We can go ahead and run this. Why isn't this working? So you guys can't see any of this, right? That's weird. What if I stop the screen share? Why doesn't Zoom want to let me screen share?
Have you been sharing your entire screen?
I thought I was, but maybe I wasn't.
Okay.
And now it doesn't. Oh shoot, Xcode just crashed. Okay, let's try this again now. Yeah, so when we run our app, you can see all of the CMU dining locations. Pretty cool. So we could do kind of a lot more with this. You can add another screen where when you click on something, it takes you and shows you the details. But hopefully this was just a good introduction to how you would make kind of a basic one screen app that shows you all of the locations for eating on CMU's campus. Are there any questions about this? In Swift, do variables pass by value or pass by reference into a function? That's a good question. I'm not completely sure. I think it might be pass by value. I will get back to you on that though. Are there any other questions on the demo? Or would people like to kind of go back to the slides and get more of an overview, I guess? If there are no more questions? Sweet. Thank you guys for sticking around for the iOS development talk. We'll have a few other mobile dev talks later, so be sure to stay for those. But yeah, if you don't have any other questions, I guess that's it for the iOS development talk of Crash Course.